In this video, we'll be creating our first multi-sampled instrument, which just means that when we click different keys on our MIDI keyboard, we're going to be triggering different sounds. So that's the only difference between a multi-sampled instrument and a single sampled instrument like we looked at in the previous few videos. Let's listen to the loop we're going to be working with first and foremost. Okay, so that's the loop we're going to be working with. I've done some effect processing and a lot of, again, super aggressive stretching techniques just to try to change the sounds from their original state. But otherwise, it's pretty much just some samples thrown together and a little bit of effects processing for intrigue. And now what I'd like to do is add a drum part to it. So what I did, and this is just a technique that I use, I went in and I just searched for drum loop, and I kept it locked to the Bitwig packages. And I told myself, I said, okay, if I have to spend more than 4 minutes clicking on different drum loops, then I need to use a different technique or take a break and come back to it. Right here, this is one of these speed, try to get out of producer block, writer's block type of techniques where I'm just going through and I just grabbed a few different things and I just listened and said, okay, how does this sound? You know, let me turn this down a little bit. And I made sure not to try to sync it to our actual tempo, because what I'm going to be doing is making a multi-sampled instrument. So tempo doesn't matter because we will have an instrument track and then we will have the MIDI grid to work with. So I just went through and I listened to a few different things. And within about a minute, I was able to find this loop here, which right now it is trying to stretch it. And if we listen to it in the context of this beat, it actually works pretty well. So that actually works pretty well, but what I want to do is I want to make my own pattern. I don't want to be stuck with that pattern there. And so what I am going to do, first of all, is I'm going to go in here, and from stretch, I'm going to go to raw. Okay, I do not want the audio engine doing any kind of or creating any kind of stretching artifacts. Okay, I want these totally raw because I know that if I can isolate these sounds, I can then trigger them with my MIDI keyboard. So let's just bring this out somewhere else just for the sake of it. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating this multi-sample at the onset points. And we can put onset points wherever we want to put them. So I'm going to start by just actually deleting all of these because there's so many of them right now. I just want to basically create like 8, maybe even less than that. And we can listen back to this loop and we can start to place onset points. Now, the one thing to remember is because we are in raw, our mouse is still trying to snap to this grid. So the solution to get away from that, the easiest thing to do is just to hold shift. And once we get into the sampler, if we need to make any additional adjustments, we can easily do that. So, okay, I like that kick sound. I'll just come in here, double click, get right at the beginning. That's a good little layered clap snare type sound. Created another one. That's an isolated kick, whereas the first one had a little bit of a bell. And you know, I'm just going to keep going with the bell. I'm not even going to get the isolated one. And now let's listen. That's a nice sound. And that's also a nice little sound. And I just want to see if that's any different than the first one. Doesn't sound like it. Now I'm just trying to listen. I can bring this out. It actually cut some of the sound off because of going out of that repitch mode. The only thing I might look to get, I could maybe, let's see, what does this last thing sound like? I don't know if I'm going to want that. What the heck? Let's create. We may not use it, but I'm just going to grab another onset, put it there. And I might just try to get one more isolated, clean kick sound. like that first one there. And what I'm going to do in this case is create an onset there. And maybe put one here. And you'll see why I do that in a second. Okay, so these are our points. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on our actual clip. And I'm going to go slice to multisample. Okay, if we did slice to drum machine, and I'll do this in the next video, that's going to allow us to do effect processing on each of these sounds individually. It's going to create a bunch of individual samplers, and that's definitely fine as a technique, and that's what most people would do. But in this case, I think we're going to be able to go a little bit faster if we work this way. So we're going to select slice to multisample, and then I need to choose slice at onsets. Okay, and that's going to create 7 slices. It's going to keep this under control. I'm fine with all of these settings as they are. I'm going to click OK. All right, and now we have created our little multi-sample instrument like so. And by default, it started on C1. Okay, and then it's gone up, you know, however many 7 is from there. So from here, let's see if I can find this range on my keyboard. We're going to get our sounds. And what the key for me here is to actually now go into the advanced view and to bring up these individual samplers, because number one, I know I'm going to delete a couple of these clips because it's not isolated sounds, and 2, I can lock them in. I'm also going to go here and I'm going to change this to one shot. So when I click it, it's going to play out the whole thing. I'm going to bring my velocity sensitivity down just so you guys can hear this easier. So there's my kick. Oop. So that got something extra I don't want. That's good. And don't forget, you can always zoom in. Let's go to our next one. That's perfect. Let's go to our next one. Oop. Okay, so we actually don't want this one at all, and I'm just going to delete it. Okay, now let's go to our next one. Wow, that actually worked out really, really well. I thought we'd get to do more editing than that. We go to our next one. This is just that long clip that we don't want. And then we go to our last one. And I think we were just trying to get that little sound. Just this. Cool. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to move all of these samples onto white keys. That's the next thing I want to do, just because it's going to make my life easier when I'm playing. Okay, so we can see right now, let's move this one over a position. And let's make sure it's still playing back correctly. Good. All right, let's move. This one should be good. And then we just have one more that we need to move, which would be this guy. Oop, wrong one. So we're going to be putting it over there. Okay, cool. So now none of my black keys are playing anything, and I now just have my range from C up to G. And you know what? I'm realizing now that with my first one, there is a little bit of an issue, because that's the same sound overlapping. So what's the point in doing that? Why don't I go and find that isolated kick? So we're going to make a quick little adjustment on the fly. And I'm going to zoom in on it. And this is exactly the way that I would work. You can actually adjust the fade out on these. Let's do a little bit of this. Okay, so let's take a listen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, I'm going to put in a pattern, and then I'll show you how we could potentially do a little bit of effects processing to make sure that we can lock this in. The other thing to point out is that anything that you adjust in here, okay, is going to adjust every single one of these. Now, if you want to change the gain on any of these individually. Now remember, we can adjust our velocity sensitivity here. So if we want to work in the MIDI clip and do our velocity edits there, we definitely can. We can just gain here, and we can also adjust our pitching if we want to change the pitch of any of these sounds without affecting the rest of them. If I was to adjust the pitch from in here, that's going to affect every single one of these samples. But if I go in and do that, or I go in and do this, okay, I can adjust it like so. Just so you're aware of that. Alrighty, so when we get back to the video, hopefully we have a nice little pattern laid out. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've spent some time going through and making some edits to these individual samples, but really the only thing I touched were the key tracking and the root note, so I could make some things different pitched if I needed to. And you can hear the overall effect. This is, of course, with all of my effects processing on as well. If I turn that off, we'll be able to hear these sounds individual. And then with all my effects processing on, like so. When we go in and actually look at the pattern, the nice thing with Bitwig is that we do have the ability to just isolate out the notes that we're actually using. So if we had done the slice at onset and hadn't been as strict, we could have just picked out the sounds that we liked and then gone into this little mode here. Otherwise, nothing that fancy. I've done a lot of editing in the MIDI part here to things like pan and to velocity. And why don't we just go ahead and listen to what we have? Let's listen to it in solo first, and then the second time around, we'll listen to it in the context of the rest of the track. And hopefully you think I did a pretty good job. And again, in this instance, I'm having to do my effects processing to everything. So I can't really isolate out any sounds. What I can do though is I could use the multiband FX 2 or 3, and in this case, you know, all I really did was just bring that width down to the lows, and in the highs I did add a little bit of a reverb, which honestly, that's the one part I might just take out. I've listened to it with it on and off, and I've just been working in headphones, so it's not really a great indicator if this is mixed well or not, but hopefully you guys can see the power in that technique and how we're able to take a drum loop, which I don't even remember what that original drum loop sounded like, and create something that works in the context of whatever production we're working on. All right, hopefully you join me for the next video.